So this is the beginning, first chapter of the reading of my new book, The Bench, A Story of Faith, People, and Purpose. I'm Jonathan Roy, author and of the book, and also I'm a speaker. But I wanted to share with you The Bench, Chapter 1. The alarm clock sang in a lone level, "Are you lonesome tonight?" by Elvis Presley, waking Dan from a brief slumber. His right hand was trained from years of routine to find the off button without looking. He was quick to turn it off. It was 5 a.m. The pillows were just right, the comforter finally perfect, and his positioning exact. But none of that mattered, as it was time to start the day. The room was still, silent, and dark as a cave in a mountain. The only sound was the AC unit buzzing outside his window. Dan pried his eye open, stared up at the darkness, then opened his left eye. He lay there for a moment, breathing. A small slit in the window shade yielded to moonlight, allowing his eyes to adjust and notice silhouettes of shapes. One caught his attention. He saw what looked like the outline of a sheep. He tried to focus his eyes to capture what the object could be. He closed his left eye and focused with his right eye, but still couldn't make it out. After a long stare at the object, he gave up thinking it might just be a toy and lay there for a minute more. His stomach gurgled, and immediately he felt pressure building up below. He hoped it would pass, but the pressure intensified until he could no longer keep it back. He looked over at his wife, cringed, and with a controlled motion opened the gate. Silent, smooth, and thankfully not deadly. He turned his head and saw his wife and new baby were still sleeping. He always loved the way his wife's face smiled even in sleep. He also heard his baby breathing, reassuring everything was fine. He made sure not to wake either of them, as he knew the wrath that would follow if he did. He gently removed the covers and lightly placed them on a diagonal. He positioned his right leg toward the edge of the bed. His left leg followed. He lowered both legs by easing his body inch by inch until his big toes touched the carpet. He kept his body straight, and gravity pulled him down. Dan controlled his descent by grabbing the sheets and letting them slide through his fingers. He landed and took a minute to listen. It was still quiet. He cautiously tiptoed through the maze of bouncy seats, piles of laundry, toys, a rocking chair, and a cat, and made it to the wall. He placed his hands on the wall and felt his way, noticing the orange peel texture. His hand slid slowly down the wall to the bathroom light switch. He counted to the fourth switch and turned only this one on. It was just enough light. Dan stared in the mirror, depressed by the half-moon dark circles under his eyes, the crow's feet at the corners, and the additional gray hairs. It was a reminder of time rushing by. Dan took his spot in between his wife's hair products, makeup, baby wash, powder, and tissues left on the counter. The tissues were what always drove him crazy. He mumbled to himself, "How hard is it to throw them away?" He faced the mirror that had splatter marks from children brushing their teeth and spitting in the sink. Again he mumbled, "Why can't they just wipe it down?" He continues getting ready, and after cutting his nose hairs, trimming his eyebrows, clipping his nails, plucking his ear hairs, showering, and shaving, he grabbed his clothes from his section of the closet and dressed in the living room. It was Monday, and Dan had worked over the weekend, missing his son's baseball game again. However, Dan was not overly concerned. He never wanted to miss any games, and he knew he needed more sleep, but there was too much to do. He was a mid-level manager for a large company and was targeted to be the next vice president. He was willing to do whatever it took and was driven to achieve what he believed was success. After looking at the clock, he realized it was time to leave. He washed down his banana with coffee, tiptoed into his kids' rooms, noticing one was perpendicular to the bed and another had an immense amount of drool hanging from her lower lip. But he did it anyway and gave each a kiss. Dan then squeezed the front door knob and twisted it, as though he were opening a safe. He heard the plunger disengage and pushed intentionally from the bottom to ensure a smooth opening. The door made a slight scraping noise. Dan paused to listen if anyone awoke. He heard nothing. He continued to float over the threshold with the knob still twisted in his hand. He cleared the threshold and pushed the bottom of the door closed first. He untwisted the knob and heard the plunger re-engage. He placed his key methodically into the keyhole and locked the door. He then pressed his ear on the door and heard nothing. It was official. He had made it without waking anyone. Dan briskly headed down his driveway, took a right, and then made the first left, about a 10-minute walk to the train, as it was slightly colder than usual. He even noticed a crisp taste in the air. He arrived at the station and immediately felt the vibration in the ground of the approaching train. There weren't as many people as usual, as it must be the cooler air keeping them away. The train roared into the station and came to a halt. Dan climbed on the train and took his normal seat. His rides were always quiet. Dan kept his head mostly buried in the negative news to prevent him from making eye contact with the others on the train. He didn't like to talk to others much. He felt people just asked questions to ask, but they truly didn't care. He would always read the money section first to see how the stock market was doing. Today was no different, except he noticed a stock they had wanted to buy if he had had the money had shot up in value. Dan saw this and breathed in and exhaled with a sigh. He thought to himself, if only I had the money. He looked up to gaze out the window, as he would do sporadically, and it would remind him of the days when life just seemed easier. The train ride was about 20 minutes, and he always got off one stop before the closest stop to the office. This allowed him to stroll through the park and enjoy a few extra minutes of fresh air. He knew every detail of his walk through the park. The large oak tree standing proud was one favorite. However, the small seedlings fighting for sun and water were his all-time favorites. He heard the same bird song that would give him a sense of peace. He always enjoyed the smell of Mondays, as the grass had just been cut Sunday night. He even knew how many steps until he turned for the final small section of path to his office. Dan was counting in his head, 130, 131, 132, and then on 133. He turned his normal corner and came to a halt. He stood there and stared at a bench that had not been there before. At least Dan didn't think it had been there before. The bench was weathered and worn, as if it had been sucked up into a tornado and spit out and rebuilt. The wood was unusually distressed with wormholes and slash marks with no pattern. He moved closer to see if the bench had any markings that would indicate where it was from or if it was artwork. He looked over at the entire bench and saw it was made of solid wood, possibly pine or cedar, with large nails piercing the joints and securing the wood together. He saw what looked like burn marks about an inch wide and embedded into the planks horizontally. He noticed a strong, unfamiliar, pungent smell like burnt steak and plastic mixed together coming from the bench. He thought, whatever sealer they use must be the good stuff. He also saw a small carving that was in a foreign language on the top center plank. It looked like Latin or Greek, but Dan had no idea what it said. As he started to step away, he felt an urge to sit. He tried to ignore it, yet every time he took a step away, his desire grew stronger. Dan turned back toward the bench and slowly took a seat. He inhaled one breath. And before he could get up, a gentleman sat next to him and asked in a resonant, elderly voice, "Why are you leaving so soon? You just got here." Dan turned around. He froze with his hands, ready for a fight, and he saw a strong yet mature man sitting on the bench staring at him. The man's face was wrinkled to perfection. His teeth were slightly yellowed, and his smile was entrancing. He was casually dressed, wearing a long-sleeved shirt and jeans with brown shoes. As Dan stood there and stared, his mind said, "Run!" But his body was frozen. "You don't need to leave so soon," said the man with a smile and a nod, looking at Dan. "Why?" Dan asked firmly with no smile. "So you can take whatever it is you want?" Dan kept his eye on the man and yelled for help. "Dan, no one can hear you yelling but yourself," the man said, laughing. "Sure, right. Help, please, I'm stuck and being held captive." "Dan, you are not captive. I'm not even touching you." The man reached out his hand to gesture for Dan to relax. "This is crazy. You know my name? Help me, please, someone." "I'm trying to help you, but you're giving me a headache. Just relax." I should run," said Dan. "Go ahead and run then. I'm too old to try to catch you." "I can't seem to move." Dan continued to face the man, hoping to get up and slowly back away. "I know. That seems to happen to most. Well, I would like for you to know that I've been waiting for you." The man gestured again for Dan to relax. "Waiting for me?" asked Dan. "Yes, you," said the man confidently with a full-blown smile from cheek to cheek. "You are Dan Gohill, married with 4 kids, right?" The man said without any doubt in his voice. "You are a manager and are next up to be a vice president at your company. You live at 777 Sampson Lane and you take the train every day to work." "How do you know that?" "Were you watching me?" You know that is illegal," Dan thought for a moment. Who was this guy? And how? And why did he know so much? Dan had the intention of running, but something wanted him to know more. "No, I wasn't watching you." "Then how do you know all that information?" asked Dan with his "I am superior" voice. The man paused to ponder Dan's question. He too looked at Dan with his innocent eyes and welcoming grin. There was an awkward yet warming silence the two men felt. "It doesn't matter, does it?" "It does matter to me," said Dan. "Okay then, let's just say a little birdie told me." The man knew Dan would not be happy with that answer, but said it anyway to keep Dan on his feet. "You expect me to believe that?" "Yes, you wouldn't believe the real reason," said the man. "This is weird. I'm leaving," Dan said. Dan tried to walk away, but his legs would not respond. He was simply powerless at that moment. "Anyway, who are you and what do you want with me?" "Want with you? Nothing." "I want something for you," the man said in a more bellowing voice. "For me?" Dan inquired cautiously. "Yeah, for you. Come back tomorrow and we will start." Dan was quick to respond as he was not getting into anything with this man. "Who are you and start what? I'm not starting anything." Dan couldn't wait for his legs to start moving as he still just wanted to run. "I am Huey and I will see you tomorrow." Huey gestured with his thumb as a thumbs up when he said his name. Dan wanted to run, but he was intrigued about all this, and his legs were still not willing to move. Dan stood there in silence as Huey just smiled at him. And in silence, Dan thought maybe there could be something good, but his fear and suspicion would not let him commit. You will not see me tomorrow, and if you do, I will call the police on you. Huey just smiled and gave a grandfatherly wink and said, That's what they all say. See you tomorrow. Huey just smiled, and Huey got up and proceeded to walk away, only to look back and give Dan another smirk. Dan shook his head in disbelief. I need more sleep, he told himself. He took a minute to process what had just happened, and his mind was spinning uncontrollably. Was it a dream? He told himself. Is Huey real? And will he be back? Dan even went as far as to wondering if he owed anyone money. He could not think of anyone he owed money, or if Huey reminded him of anyone. He looked at the time and was happy to feel his legs willing to move again. He walked into his office and made himself a cup of coffee with hazelnut, turned the computer on, and immediately started answering emails. We will continue next time.